it's a real privilege to be here in the Usher Hall with such a wonderful audience. I have just come from Glasgow, where I've spoken to hundreds of people in Glasgow, and I tell you, the silent majority is prepared to be silent no longer. And I see people everywhere across Scotland speaking up for our vision of Scotland's future inside and not outside the United Kingdom. And I'm pleased to be with this expert panel this evening. George, my old friend, my mentor, my tall mentor. George and I tell you, we're a better team than Alex Salmond and Jim Kong-Yoon of North Korea. And I want to speak up this evening for our vision of a Scottish Parliament inside the United Kingdom, for more powers, but for a Parliament and for change that is fairer, that will be faster, that will be better, that will be safer, and will be friendlier than anything the Scottish National Party can offer for the future. Because what we have seen this week, in just the last few days, is the evidence that you will have heard this evening, that under the plans for an independent Scotland, prices would rise, jobs would be lost, opportunities would be destroyed, businesses would go, investment would be cut, an economic minefield that has been created as a result of policies that have not been thought through. And never have I seen in such a short period of time so many warnings from so many people about the danger and the damage that could be done. And I say to Alex Salmond, you can ignore or try to ignore some of the warnings some of the time, but you cannot ignore all of the warnings all of the time. I want to create what I think is the bigger picture for the future, because this is not just a decision for ourselves and for this generation, it is a decision for many generations to come. And I want you to think of a speech that was made 50 years ago by John Kennedy, the President of the United States of America. And he gave his inaugural address in 1961, and he spoke of the new world that he thought could be created. There were some great phrases in that speech. You know, the torch is passed to a new generation about the prospects for a generation led by young people. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. A statement of the importance of public service that I think we all endorse. Never negotiate from fear, never fear to negotiate. A call for diplomacy rather than conflict as a solution to the problems of making peace in the world. He had beaten Richard Nixon, the man who wanted to be president, defeated in that election. And Richard Nixon was asked which of these famous phrases and all of the phrases in that great speech would you like to have delivered? And he answered, there was only one. I solemnly promise that I will execute the office of President of the United States of America. But you know, the greatest statement that John Kennedy made then was, ask not what you Americans can do for yourself. Ask what we together as citizens of the world can do for the future of mankind. And he went on to give this famous speech in Philadelphia as he said, the past generations, we had a declaration of independence. It's now time, he said, for a declaration of interdependence. And you know, there are no four nations in the world that have found a way of living together in the way that Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland have managed to do. Over 3 centuries between Scotland and England, and just think of defence and security. There is not a battlefield in Europe where Scots, English, Welsh and Northern Irish people did not fight together and fight side by side. There is not a cemetery in Europe that came out of that war where Scots, English, Welsh and Irish are not lying side by side. And when someone was injured during that war, did they say to each other, are you Scots or English or Welsh or Irish? They said no. They would help each other. They fought together, they sacrificed together, they cried, they celebrated together, they mourned together, and we won freedom against fascism by fighting and working together. And you know, it's not just that we've come together for defence and security. Think of the economy as well. There's a famous story about a Scotsman on his way to the Wembley Football International. And he's in this crowded underground train. And someone shouts, and hears the shout, "Penicillin!" And they rush and they think, can we get a doctor? Is this man really ill? And then suddenly the man shouts again, "Penicillin, chloroform," he says. And people wonder what they're going to do. And then he says, "Penicillin, chloroform, the steam engine, the telephone, the television. We Scots are the greatest and most inventive nation on earth." But you know, there's a bigger truth behind that. James Watt, his steam engine, invented in Scotland, developed by Matthew Boulton in England. Alexander Fleming, penicillin, invented in London by a Scot who needed the support of Oxford and Cambridge to develop it. Alexander Graham Bell, the telephone, the same. John Logie Baird, and the television, developed in Hastings by a man who came from Helensburgh. And then in Scotland, all these inventors, Ian Wilmot to this day, but before him, all these men, James Black and others, English people who came to Scotland, who made their inventions in Scotland. And what the truth is, the cross-fertilization of ideas that made possible the great successes in our economy in the past. But you know, I want to point to something even bigger. Think of 90 years ago, the aftermath of the First World War, unemployment at its worst. It was Scots, leaders and Scots workers, who came together in 1921, and they said to each other, "We want an end to the separate Scottish Poor Law. We want to build together with the rest of the United Kingdom a United Kingdom welfare state." And then in the 1940s, we had a decision to make about the health system. And it was Scots who led the way and said, look, it doesn't make sense just to have a separately funded Scottish healthcare system. They wanted to get away from a situation where nurses were having to leave the beds of patients to run charity flag days to pay for vital equipment. They said, no, let us build a United Kingdom funded healthcare system, universal, free at the point of need, where we pool and share the resources of the whole of the United Kingdom, so that we can deliver healthcare for all. And that's the secret of what has happened over these last 100 years. Whatever your nationality, Scots, English, Welsh, Irish, the same economic and social rights, based on need and not on what ethnic group you come from. And you know, there's no other group of nations in the world has managed this. Australia, New Zealand? No. The countries in the European? No. The Germans will not provide the same support for the Greeks that we provide for each other in the United Kingdom. Even in the United States of America, they cannot agree on the same social and economic rights to health care and to welfare between one of the states in the Union and the other. And though they cannot develop the social and economic rights that go with the civil and political rights we have. So we have created something quite unique in the United Kingdom. When you're unemployed and need help, when you're sick and need health care, when you're young and need child benefit, when you're old and need a pension, it's a UK-wide pension system, a UK-wide healthcare system, a UK-wide welfare state, and we have found a way where 4 different groups, different nationalities, great loyalties, tremendous traditions, tremendous histories, together, we have found a way where we can unite and work together for the common good. And I happen to believe that that is not the way of the past, it is the way of the future as well. I happen to believe that nations will have to find a way of working together better in the future. That cooperation and solidarity and interdependence rather than independence is the bigger idea of the future. Now I say that, and yield to no one in my pride in being Scottish. Born in Scotland, brought up in Scotland. Even when I worked in London, my home was in Scotland. And I too have got the patriotic. Don't let any nationalist tell you that you are less patriotic in your support for Scotland than anyone else. All of you will have memories. My first memory, Scotland-England Football International. I was listening to it on the radio. 1961. 8 minutes, goal for England. 12 minutes, goal for England. England 9, Scotland 3. And it was a game of football and not rugby. There were players in that team who denied being on the field that day. Dave Mackay, the famous Hearts player, he actually scored one of the 3 goals for Scotland. And he kept saying he never played in the match. Frank Harvey was the goalkeeper. You may remember, the Celtic goalkeeper. He lost 9 goals that day, and things got so tough for him, he had to go as far away from Scotland as possible, and he emigrated to Australia. 30 years later, in the 1990s, Dennis Law, one of our great footballers, was in Australia on holiday, and he looked at Frank Haffey, and Frank Haffey's first question, is it safe to come back? And of course the answer was no. So I yield to no one in my patriotic pride to be Scottish. And this is our patriotic vision of Scotland's future. Proud to be Scottish. Proud in our institutions and history. Proud that we have created a Scottish Parliament. Proud too that it's going to have more powers. But proud that we share and cooperate as part of the bigger United Kingdom. That's the alternative to the nationalist view of the future. Now think what this referendum choice is really about when it comes down to it. The nationalists want you to think that you're voting on whether Scotland is a nation. Scotland is a nation yesterday, today and tomorrow, and will be a nation after September the 19th, when we vote no. And they want you to think you're voting on whether Scotland has a parliament. Well, Scotland has a parliament because we had a referendum more than 10 years ago to create that parliament. That's not what it's about. They want you to think you're voting on whether the parliament should have more powers, as if there is no agreement now that every party, and they're represented here this evening, have all agreed that Parliament will have no powers. More powers. That's not what it's about. Some of them want you to think it's a vote on the Conservative government. I know what side I would be on in that vote. But no, what is this vote about? It's about one simple proposition when it comes down to it. What would be the effect of voting yes on September the 18th? It is blunt and it is brutal. It is to break every single link that we have with the Constitution of the United Kingdom. That's what it's about, and that's why people should be told the consequences. Because what do we then lose? We lose the UK pension. A pension that we've paid into all our lives, then to be separated off into different pensions for different parts of the United Kingdom with no cause for doing so. And in any event, Scotland loses £425 million that we get because our needs are greater and the system of pension provision respects the needs of those who have got disabilities and who are poor, and therefore we are the beneficiary of that system. What do we lose also? Breaking all the links. The relationships that allow us to have 1 million jobs in Scotland that are linked to membership of the UK. Jobs in Scottish companies exporting to England, jobs in British companies that are involved in Scotland, jobs from the shipbuilding industry to the financial services industry, and what the Scottish National Party don't tell you. Norway they compare themselves with. Norway has 8% of its exports going to its biggest neighbour, Sweden. Scotland has 70% of our exports going to our biggest neighbour, England. The consequence for an economy that is as open as Scotland, with trade links that are so big with one country, with a number of industries that are wholly dependent on cooperation across the borders, from energy to financial services to shipbuilding, I think everybody knows no case has been made for breaking the link would it affect jobs. And I want to raise one other issue because I know that people want to ask questions as well, and I don't want to take up the time having arrived late from the meeting in Glasgow. I want to say something about the National Health Service this evening. Because Mr. Salmond has tried to tell you that an English Prime Minister would privatise and cut the budgets of the health service in Scotland. He has tried to tell people that he is powerless at the moment to make for a better health service and provide the money it needs. They tried to tell you that separation is the only possibility if you want to save the health service. This is the biggest lie that is being perpetrated. It's a lie that is designed to worry the patients and sick and vulnerable people in their communities about the continuity and guarantees for their care. And it's a desperate exploitation of the dedicated work of staff, nurses, midwives, doctors in the health service in Scotland. The Scotland Act of 1998 makes it absolutely clear that under the powers of the Scottish Parliament, they have not only the ability to keep the National Health Service in public hands, but they could raise more than £1 billion in money if they so wanted to give extra funds to the health service. They are not powerless. The Scotland Act 2012 makes it clear that they are not powerless in future either. Because it's not just £1 billion, but £2 billion or £3 billion that could be raised in addition to the £12 billion that is provided in the UK allocation of funds. And they could spend that on the health service if they wanted. They are not powerless. And the proposals we put this week that have been discussed by all the parties and approved by all the parties mean that at a minimum, the Scottish Parliament in future would have the power, and is not powerless, to spend 4, 5 or 6 billion extra, if it so wanted, on the National Health Service. I was born into the National Health Service, grew up in the National Health Service, came of age in the National Health Service. What happened to me and what's happened to other people makes me love and revere and respect the National Health Service. Do you think that we, particularly us, the party that created the National Health Service, that built the National Health Service, would stand back and do nothing if we thought the National Health Service could be privatised and cut as a result of a decision made by the UK without any intervention possible by the Scottish Government? No. The powers of the Scottish Parliament make it clear that we can guarantee to everyone here today that the National Health Service will remain in public hands, be universal and free at the point of need, forever or as long as the people of Scotland wish it, and we must tell people that that's the case. If Mr. Salmond continues to say he is powerless as First Minister to protect our National Health Service, but he both has the power and the ability to raise the money, he should make way for someone who can run the health service properly in future in Scotland. I want to end with one story that I think sums up where we are. And funnily enough, it's about Richard Nixon, that American again. Ghana was becoming independent in 1959. Colonial freedom to be given to it. Richard Nixon was sent by America as Vice President to the inauguration of the new Constitution in Ghana. And he was in a hall like this at the celebrations that were taking place. And gauche as he was, he thought that he might go down to the audience and talk to some of the people there. 1959. And he walks down to the audience and he says rather stupidly, "How does it feel to be free?" Then he says to the next person, who gets an answer, "How does it feel to be free?" And then he gets to the next person and they say, "How does it feel to be free?" And he said, "How should I know? I come from Alabama in the United States of America." 1959. Two great movements, colonial freedom, the break from imperialism, civil rights struggle in the United States of America. What are we talking about freedom from in this debate? It is not a colonial struggle. It is not a civil rights struggle. The freedom that people really want is the freedom from poverty, The separation that they want is not from England. The separation they want is from deprivation, inequality, and injustice. And the liberation people want is the liberation not from the neighbours and friends in any part of the United Kingdom, but liberation from injustices and inequalities that happen, that can be resolved, and are best resolved by us working together. Now, I finish with this story. Olof Palme was the Prime Minister of Sweden, and he was Prime Minister at a time when Ronald Reagan, believe it or not, was President of the United States of America. And Olof Palme was a friend of the poor. He wanted to do things as we want to do things for working people in this country, and he had a vision that countries could cooperate together instead of splitting apart. And he kept asking to see Ronald Reagan, and Reagan refused to meet him. And eventually, as Reagan was just about to leave office, Reagan consented. And so Palme, this great internationalist, arrives at the White House. Reagan turns to his advisors and says, "But isn't this man a communist?" And his advisors promptly say, "No, Mr. President, he's an anti-communist." And Mr. Reagan says, "I don't care what kind of communist he is." And Palme comes into the office, and Reagan says, "What is it that you're really about? What do you want? Do you want to abolish the rich?" He said, "No." He said, "I want to abolish the poor, and I want every single person and every single child to have a chance to realize their potential to the full." Now, surely that is what is worth uniting about. Surely solidarity between nations is important to achieving opportunities for every child. And surely an interdependent world is the way of the future. I was travelling in a car just after I lost my job, courtesy of the British people. And I was talking to my son, who was going to school, and I was asking him what he wanted to be when he grew up, as fathers do. He was 5 at the time. And he said, quite bravely, he said, "I want to be a builder," he said, "and a teacher, and a dad." And I thought, that's wonderful. And then he said, "But you're just a dad." Put me in my place. But you know, this is what this debate is actually about. It's not about us as politicians. It's about us as fathers and mothers and parents and grandparents. Because this is a vote not about me, and it's not a vote about you only. It is not just a vote about the here and now. It is not a vote about this year. It is a vote about not just one generation, but many generations. We're being asked to make an irreversible decision from which there is no going back, not just from us, but for our children, our grandchildren, and many generations to come. And I believe that the Scottish people are wise enough, and the Scottish people are compassionate and caring enough to see that the way of the future is not to retreat into the isolationism of the past, but to build a better United Kingdom, with Scotland having a bigger role. The truth is, the future for Scotland is not leaving the United Kingdom, it is leading the United Kingdom, and that's what we're going to do.